We're at the Ontario Legislature for a special edition of The Point. It's Budget Day, and we heard from Finance Minister Charles Sousa presenting his vision for Ontario. We're joined today with Liberal MPP John Fraser, the member for Ottawa South, and the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, Vic Fedeli, the MPP for Nipissing and the PC Party Finance Critic, Kathryn McGarry, the NDP Finance Critic and the member for Kitchener-Waterloo, as well as Mayor Linda Jeffrey from the City of Brampton. All this on this special edition of The Point. I'm joined by my colleague Craig Hewson from Aurora Strategy to discuss today's Ontario budget. Craig, great to have you on.
Thanks, Marcel.
So give us the highlights of today's budget.
In a nutshell, today's budget was all about infrastructure. The government didn't surprise us with their plan to divest itself of 60% of Hydro One. They're calling it broadening the ownership of Hydro One. So that we've been speaking about for 2 weeks. The other thing that was in there, no surprise again, was the beer and supermarkets we've heard before. And
a lot of this was all about transit and infrastructure, a huge investment that the government is making in that area.
Absolutely. The big plan, $130 billion over the next 10 years, the government coining that the largest investment ever in Ontario infrastructure, and that will be spent on rail, highways, roads, bridges outside the GTHA, and that's in a nutshell what we're going to see. Regional rapid rail here in the GTHA.
Right, and how are they going to pay for all of this?
Well, we saw the plan to sell off, get $9 billion from the Hydro One sale. That's going to go into the Trillium Trust. The government is also looking to sell some key pieces of real estate. OPG's building just south of us here at Queen's Park, their head office building, they're going to look to sell that. The Lakeview Generation Station in Mississauga is on the chopping block, that prime piece of real estate as well.
And they're still going to be running a deficit after all this is said and done.
Yes, the deficit forecast is now $8.5 billion. It was pegged at 10.9 last year, so they've made some headway, and they still plan to have the deficit completely eliminated by the 2017-18 budget.
And is there any new taxes that Ontarians are going to be facing?
No real new taxes. There is some new tax on beer, so consumers won't be completely excited about the availability of it in supermarkets, but there will be some new tax there, but no new income taxes, no new taxes to speak of in this budget today.
Mm-hmm. Any other highlights from today's budget?
Well, drivers will be happy with the budget. Insurance premiums should come down, still not the 15% that was promised by this government, but those drivers that have winter tires and prove that they put winter tires on their car are going to see a reduction in premiums. Commuters, of course, the rapid rail transit here in the Greater Toronto Area will really make commuters happy as well.
Thanks so much for joining us and bringing us highlights of today's budget. I'm joined with the member for Ottawa South, John Fraser, who's the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So, your Finance Minister stood up in the House just a little while ago to deliver the budget. Yeah. Give us the highlights.
It's about building Ontario up. It's about investing in people and those things that people depend on most. At the same time, continuing on our path to balance by 2017, 2018. Mm-hmm. So if you take a look, it's the most historic investment in public transit in our history. That's a very important thing for our economy. It's not just good to get people to work on time and home on time. Mm-hmm. It's also important to get those goods that people depend on to the place where they have to be. And at the same time, it's good for our environment, which is a smart thing to do.
And how much are we talking about to give context?
It was $31.5 billion over 10 years, I think $16 billion of it in the GTA and about $15 billion outside of that.
Now, spending all that money on transit infrastructure, do we have any money being allocated for health, education, and other sectors?
There continue to be an investment. That is $100 million over 10 years, which is about $10 million a year. So continuing on, we have more money in this budget for renewing schools, for instance, this year. So we have to continue to invest in those things, because it's, the budgets aren't about this year or next year. They're also about 10, 15 years down the road. So investments in schools and hospitals and growth, public transit are all about, making sure that, 15 years from now or 20 years from now, where we want to be. So our children or grandchildren don't have to take care of it.
So you make an interesting point about talking about the long term, and yet this government is committed to redistributing the assets of Hydro One. And there's been a number of criticisms from the opposition that taking that money is only a small percentage of the overall infrastructure investment, and yet it's going to hurt Ontarians because it could drive up rates and...
we're still going to retain regulatory control over the pricing of electricity. I think the way forward, as directed by the Advisory Council, with Ed Clark at the head, is a prudent way. I know that we're going to offer in the IPO initial 15%. We're going to retain, and we'll look at that and build that over time, up to 60% ownership, but no one would own more than 10% of that. Who are going to buy those things? They're going to be individuals, pension plans, and it's, I think it's important that we unlock the value in that asset. You can't put yourself at a standstill and say, well, we'll build that stuff 10 years from now. First of all, it takes a while to plan and to before you build. So you have an idea you want to build something. Sometimes it's 5, 7, 10, 12 years down the road. So we need to do that now, and we need to unlock that value.
But according to the budget documents, the province would only realize about $4 billion in the first tranche, the first phase of the sell-off. And the total amount that's being allocated over the 10 years is somewhere in the neighborhood of $130 billion. That only accounts for maybe 3%.
It reduces our need to borrow over that period of time. That's an important thing to remember. So you have to start somewhere. There are values in assets. It's not just Hydro One. It's there's an LCBO property here. There's property around the province. We sold our GM shares. That's going into the Trillium Trust. So those funds are needed. You have to start somewhere. It's when you look at your family or your business, you say, okay, what are the assets that I have here, and how can I realize value out of them? To do the things that we need to do to either grow my business or to make sure that I can fund I can help fund my kids with their education or when they're getting married. So it's the same. It's the same principle. You have to look at. It's not just what you have coming in. It's what are the assets that you've built up. So
we'll be right back in a moment. Again, you raised another point is not having to borrow, but Ontario has the largest sub-sovereign debt anywhere. And it's also one of the fastest growing sections of the budget. I think the number was over 5% increase over last year. And so we owe hundreds of billions of dollars in debt, not deficit, debt. How are we dealing with that?
If you look at our debt, comparable to the federal government, it is comparable. It's on par.
Well, we have the total amount of debt held by all the other provinces, 9 provinces and territories, is equal to that of Ontario.
Yeah, you have to remember we're the engine of the economy. When we're the engine of Canada, we drive Canada's economy. And when the recession hit, that was a very serious thing for Canada's economy. So we did things like we protected jobs in the auto sector. We did things like saying we're going to continue to build up infrastructure because we want to stimulate the economy and make sure that people have jobs. We're not going to cut down those services like hospitals and schools, public transit that families depend on. We built them up. We're building a certain society. We have governments to do those things that we can't do alone for each other. So So it's a tough balance, but you have to make sure you get that balance. You know, it's easy to run a deficit in people's lives. Nobody sees the ledger sheets for 13 million Ontarians or their families. You see the one here, but you don't see the one where somebody's losing 2 hours a day with their kids. You don't see them not being able to get access to, you know, we were last in Canada for wait times for things like hips and knees and MRIs, and we're first in Canada. I believe that's the kind of society that Ontarians want us to build. So I think that this budget is aligned with that. So.
And in terms of your own area of healthcare, how's the budget addressing healthcare in Ontario?
Well, I think what you take a look at right now is we've held small increase in health. I think it's about 1.9%. So we've been able to hold back salaries. We've continued to invest in the community. That's part of it. If you look in the community sector of the budget, it's about 5% increase annually. So we're continuing to invest there. We're trying to find better ways of doing things. And part of what my mandate is to build a strategy around palliative care.
Now you're the member for Ottawa South,
yeah.
And obviously we had 2 days ago the federal budget, and we heard a number of comments from the finance minister and the premier about the federal government not stepping up to the plate in addressing issues of concern to Ontario.
Well, I think that we still have that fiscal gap that $11 billion fiscal gap that hasn't been addressed. But if you look at things like there's nothing about climate change, well, that's not a problem we can leave to our grandchildren. There's nothing about people's retirement security. So there's no mention of enhancing the CPP, which I think we already knew was going to be there. That's something 20 or 30 years down the road, and to not do something about that is an abdication, I believe, of responsibility. That's why we've put forward the Ontario Pension Plan. Not an easy thing to do, but we have to address that problem 30 years down the road. It's not there for Vaughn, our new grandchild. That's not for him to take care of. That's for us politically to take care of right now, and the federal government needs to take leadership in that regard.
Well, thank you very much for sharing some of your thoughts on the budget. I was joined by Ottawa South MPP John Fraser. We're joined by Ontario PC finance critic Vic Fedeli, member for Nipissing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for being here today.
So we had Finance Minister Sousa stand up and present his budget. What is it that you like and what is it that you don't like about this?
Well, let's start with what I don't like for Ontario, and that's the fact that what you're going to see now are more cuts in health and more cuts in education. You're going to see your hydro bill skyrocket. That's really the message that I got out of the budget today.
So the minister earlier spoke about selling off Hydro One. Yeah. How's that going to impact on the price that people pay at the meter?
Well, first of all, that in itself is going to make your hydro bill skyrocket. I'll tell you about that in a moment. What's wrong with that sale is they tell you that the sale is to go into infrastructure in Ontario, part of the $130 billion, except for the fact that last year when the minister stood up in the very same chair, he announced that same $130 billion, but then told us it would only take $3.1 billion of asset sales to make that happen. Now all of a sudden we have to sell $9 billion of hydro, $1.3 billion of GM, we're going to sell the LCBO head office, OPG, and other buildings. What happened that all of a sudden now you need $12 billion instead of $3 billion? And so we know what happened. The budget was $2.4 billion higher. Selling hydro and not using the money to lower hydro's debt, but using it to pay off the Liberals' bills, that is going to raise your hydro bill this year.
Now, he did say that they're on track to eliminate the deficit, but we're still going to see a deficit, $8.4 billion, I believe, next year, and then they're going to try and get it to 4.8 and then to 0. Do you believe those numbers?
Nobody believes that. Nobody in the business community believes that whatsoever. And why? The Moody's debt rating service lowered our debt rating last year. Fitch lowered our debt rating. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce says we are in crisis situation with our Ontario economy. And even the Auditor General, just in December, said to us, your spending is outpacing your revenue in Ontario, and if you don't drastically change the path you're on, she called it, you're going to start to crowd out the things that are important to Ontario, and that's exactly what's happening today. So our deficit is 8.5 approximately $billion, but our interest payments next year will be $11.4 billion. That's up 5.7%. That's the only thing in the budget that's really increasing at that pace. Not healthcare, not education, but interest. That's why nobody believes that there's been a dramatic shift in our policies, the shift that everybody says we need.
And I understand that Ontario now has the largest sub-national debt, sub-sovereign debt, sorry, of anyone in the world.
Not only that, if you add all of the debt of every other province combined, it's just about equal to Ontario's debt alone. So we are tax and spend. That's the regime that we've had for 12 years, and we saw more of that today. Taxes are going up, $100 million in beer tax. You have the new aviation fuel tax, the second year is kicked in. You've got a carbon tax coming, you've got an Ontario pension tax coming, and they've taken the tax credits away of important businesses like the film industry and digital industry and apprentice programs which create jobs. They've taken those tax credits away. So they're taxing us, and spending was up $2.4 billion this year.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Ms. Fedeli. I was joined by Ontario PC Party finance critic Vic Fedeli. I'm joined with Kathryn McGarry, the NDP finance critic and the member for Kitchener-Waterloo. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
You heard the finance minister. What's your take on this budget?
So when you look at you peel back the layers, you look at the fine details of this budget, it is definitely a budget that's going to continue to hurt people in the province of Ontario. Ontarians will see themselves paying for some of the short-sighted decisions that have been made by this government. And those decisions are really being driven by their own mismanagement of the finances in the province of Ontario. You know, a lot of some of the direction that this government is going in is that they're looking to sell off public assets. One of those assets is Hydro One. When you look at the budget, you can see that the revenue that is generated from OPG and Hydro One is one of the only dividends that actually is paying off from the public assets in the province. So they're looking to, you know, burn the furniture to heat the house. It's because they're so desperate for money.
And a lot of people want the government to invest in transit. We have gridlock all over the province, any major city you go in. And so the government's responded with this proposed budget to address that concern. If they don't sell hydro, how do they pay for the transit investment? Well,
there are so many other progressive ideas out there, actually. I mean, they're keeping these HST corporate tax loopholes open. If you cost that out by 2018, that's $1.3 billion. You know, that corporations are actually doing very well at the high echelon. It's the frontline workers and the average families in the province of Ontario that are being hurt. We would actually also look at the way public infrastructure is funded. I mean, the Auditor General came out with a scathing report around public-private partnerships, $6.5 billion in additional financing and legal fees and consulting fees. Bay Street is doing quite fine, actually. So we would look at the way that the infrastructure is funded. We would have dedicated funding so that when revenues come into Queen's Park, you know, the rest of the province actually knows where those dollars are going. And we've always been committed to that kind of infrastructure. This is not a new issue, though. This government has been in power now for over 12 years. years. So it's not like they just woke up today and realized that, that there's a gridlock in the province of Ontario. And it's not just Toronto. If you think of my community, we've been promised, of course, two-way high speed at one point. Last year, the Minister of Transportation promised us a bullet train. And so we're looking for that commitment. We were looking for that financial commitment in this budget. It was not there. But going back to the Hydro One sale, they've opened the door to other public assets as well. And when you have Hydro One, which is an annualized, stable form of revenue, you're giving that up for a quick hit of $4 billion, which actually, in the grand scheme of things, of a $130 billion promise, if you will, if you believe that, that's only 3%. So
Right.
it is so short-sighted, and it wouldn't test, if the financial accountability officer for the province could go through that deal, it would not test well for him. So we're concerned about where the money is going. We're concerned about the cuts, 5.5% cuts in all other programs except for education and healthcare, and yet those cuts actually happened also in the last budget. So, chasing the money in this place and finding where the investment is going is becoming quite muddled, I must tell you.
They've also said that they want to reduce the size of the public service through attrition.
Yeah.
And so we heard from the Ontario Nurses Association that a number of nurses' jobs have been lost and have not been replaced.
No.
And we're starting to see that through other sectors of the public service.
Yeah, I mean, we question, these are real jobs, real people. There's obviously a loss of revenue because of job loss. You'll see in the budget that the government finally had to come clean is that they over-projected. They projected that they were going to have 67,000 more jobs. So their job calculations are just as bad as Tim Hudak's. And we are seeing the cuts. And so it's frustrating, and I know that it's infuriating for the people of this province to be have the lived experience of poor fiscal management and cuts to healthcare and education, and then have the Premier and the Finance Minister stand up and say, we are not cutting jobs. It's just not true.
Well, thank you very much, member.
Yeah, no, I look forward to continuing the conversation.
As do I. We're joined by the NDP finance critic, Kathryn Fife, the member for Kitchener-Waterloo. Joining me is Brampton Mayor Linda Jeffrey, former MPP, former Cabinet Minister. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm very pleased to be here.
And you must be a very happy person today with the Minister's announcement for investments in infrastructure and especially transit.
Yes, it's been a good week for Peel and Brampton in particular.
So the Minister and the Premier were on hand to announce just before the budget that they would fully fund the Metrolinx project that will go right up Pure Ontario and into Main Street and connect the GO Transit at the south end and at the north end in Brampton.
Yep. And the week before they talked about the GO service as well, doubling and quadrupling the rides. So we've been very fortunate in having a provincial partner that's stepping up to the plate with GO service, LRT, and we're in the midst of reconstructing and widening 410 Highway in Brampton. Those are huge investments in our city, and we're very grateful.
Now, one thing we didn't hear is investing in healthcare. And I know you have a particular project in Brampton, the redevelopment of Peel Memorial Hospital.
I'm not concerned about that at all. The province has been good partners with the City of Brampton. They've been funding that high growth that we've been experiencing through the Brampton Civic Hospital. Peel Memorial is still on track, even though we had a fire earlier in the year. And they continue to step up to the plate for our community and certainly Peel. So even though it wasn't in the budget, this is an aspirational document, and I think we heard that from the Minister. He spoke about the vision that the province has. I think this is a very bright vision for this province and certainly for Brampton.
We've now had two budgets in 2 days, the federal budget 2 days ago and this one today. The feds have only put up $100 million, I believe, for infrastructure investments for the whole country. You're part of the coalition of major mayors from across the country through the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. How is that impacted?
I don't want to speculate what other mayors may be saying, but I would say that our expectations were pretty high. And I understand the federal government is trying to constrain their costs, but this is a time to invest. Infrastructure, we know, has huge impacts on jobs and economic development, and really investors around the world are looking to Ontario to invest in. And if the federal government isn't one of those partners, they're missing an opportunity to help build Canada, and certainly a lot of the mayors that I deal with, infrastructure is a huge issue. We need a partner. It's nice to have the province at the table, but it's always better to have that third partner.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I was talking with Mayor Linda Jeffrey from the City of Brampton. Thank you for joining us on this special edition of The Point. Remember to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Marcel. See you next time on The Point.